Hey guys, I'm Joshua Vidovic from Vidovic Arts, and today we're working on another little handcrafted project here. It is a mimic box. So this is what it looks like. There's a little bit of a 3D printed filament there, but this is what we're going to be making, and you're only going to need two components, one being a box, a pre-made box, which is this bit here, it's made of wood, and the other being Epoxy Sculpt, which we've used in previous videos, such as the Nurgle guy that I made, and the Nurgle dragon, and the other dragon, and it's just an awesome little tool to have around, and I think everyone should kind of have it, especially if you're into miniature making. You should have like a green stuff kind of thing that you can use to fix any kind of 3D printed models that might end up not working out, so you don't end up throwing away things. But you can also use it to make some crazy stuff like this right here. Now I'm going to show you how we made this thing. Let's get into the build. So as always with Epoxy Sculpt, you're going to have to mix the two compounds together. Now you're going to have to do this by getting 1:1. You don't want to have too much of one or the other because it can ruin the entire integrity and strength of the compound that you're using. So what you want to do is mix those two together and make sure it comes together and there's like an even consistent color like you would with green stuff or any two compounds that have to be mixed together. Once it's mixed together, it's actually really soft, surprisingly so, and it should be warm because you've mixed it with your hands, and that's what keeps it soft. So if it gets too cold, it will harden, but you can warm it up quickly, kind of like a plasticine, but it's a little bit more sturdier than plasticine is. And one of the cool things about this material is you can actually mix like if you dip your fingers in water, or a tool in water, you will find it a lot easier to smooth things out, and it'll also keep things from sticking to one another. So if you get water on one little bit of Epoxy Sculpt and you put it on another, they might not stick well together. Now I actually worked on some models beforehand. I pretty much just rolled up a noodle and made a little teeth by chopping off bits of the noodle and and making them a little bit sharp, and I let them dry, and it usually takes around 2 to 3 hours for this stuff to dry, strong enough for you to be able to paint and not have to worry about it warping while you paint. But yeah, these teeth were made just by making a noodle and chopping them up, and you can easily do that before you start the project, but I actually later on go and make brand new teeth because I didn't make enough in this video. So you can see how to use teeth pre-made and also just make it on the fly. Now one of the most important parts about this project is actually making sure that the Epoxy Sculpt kind of blends in with the wood. You could go about doing this by like using a lot and actually covering that entire side of the box in Epoxy Sculpt and then coming back and sculpting in like lines for the grains and stuff. For the grain of the wood, or you could try to do what I'm doing here, which is blend it into the actual wood. Now this is probably the harder way to do it because it requires a lot of skill, and you're gonna have to blend it into like very smooth levels of detail. I don't know how to explain this in proper terminology. Basically it's gonna have to be 1:1 with the wood, so it's not very easy to do, and I don't know, I think it was I think I would have done it differently if I'd gone back. I would have done the entire side with the Epoxy Sculpt and then probably sculpted in some of the wood afterwards, just because in certain light it comes out really obvious that it's just sculpted on, and yeah, I think I would have just changed the way I did that, but I think it worked out rather well, and if I was going to do this again, I could probably fix it, knowing how it looks at the end. But yeah, the teeth themselves, pretty much just jamming them into spots that I like, and making sure that they line up with the other side. It's a lot of just fiddling and just tweaking it as it goes along. Yeah, getting it to line up is probably one of the most annoying things, but as you're going along, it really does show, and it looks awesome. Pretty much at this point, all I wanted it to do was be dry and finished so I could paint it up. But you just got to keep going and make sure that you don't let them sit too close to each other because they can stick. So yeah, this is where I am actually adding in the teeth that have not been sculpted. I'm sculpting them on the fly, and I decided to put them on the outside of the box instead of being underneath the lip of the mouth of the box. So these teeth are kind of growing outside of the skin in a very disgusting kind of manner, but they look really cool. And later on, I'll come back and add in a little bit of depth so it looks like they're really, really in that wood coming out instead of just, you know, floating on top of the surface. But yeah, having the two together does definitely make it look much more disgusting, and I really love the macabre and gross in these projects. It's very Nurgle-esque. You could easily have this for a Nurgle box if you painted the scheme differently than I did in the end. But yeah, I went for you know, the typical mimic box that you see, except it's a non-hinged base box. Now, I actually really want to make more of these in the future, and I want to do them with hinges like you would see normally with a normal mimic box. The idea of the teeth being on the inside and the outside not exposing what the mimic actually is on the inside, so it just looks like a normal box. But we've got this box here, and we've gone with the outside teeth, so I might come back and do another video later on where I make the mimic's teeth on the inside of the box. So what I'm doing here is pretty much making a lip for the box and making it really obvious that there's two different kind of materials here. So you've got the lip of the box being the wood, and the inside being like a fleshy, gross thing that works. Obviously, it's just a box, but you want it to look different. So the teeth and the inside of the box is actually, you know, flesh. It's not made of wood, whereas the outside is made of wood. So I've got that lip lined all the way around, and it helps the teeth kind of have a place to sit and look a little bit more realistic as opposed to just teeth hovering around the edge of a box. So once you've got a pretty fair understanding of where all your teeth are and how it looks, and you're happy with how it looks, I think you can add more on, but the most important thing is to make sure it is blended with the box, like I said earlier. Because if it's not, it will look really bad. It won't look as great as it looks when it's nice and grey and unsculpted, unpainted. It'll look a bit trashy. So add in those last teeth that you want to put in, and get a tool and sculpt around the edges of the wood skin bit, and make sure it looks close to how the wood is that you're using. It could be any kind of wood that you're using. This is why the idea of having that entire outside edge being epoxy as opposed to trying to blend it in is a lot easier than just trying to blend it in, because you can pretty much invent what the wood looks like from scratch instead of having to really test your skills and make the epoxy look like wood that's like actual wood. It's a lot easier to just make it your own. So I did my best pretty much by running lines across the epoxy and matching them up to any kind of lines that I saw on the box. Now, not all boxes are going to be like this, I really understand that, but a lot of boxes have the grain going through it, so you might be able to get away with this. And it does help when painting the actual model. You'll have that depth. It's going to be impossible to paint it to look like wood if you don't have some sort of sculpted lines. Now I'm using the water so the tool doesn't actually stick and get stuck. Otherwise, when you're doing this, it'll turn into like a bit of a dust, and it'll stick. It's kind of, it turns into crap. It just goes really bad. So make sure you're using that water as you go along with this epoxy sculpt. This is pretty much the only way to make your models or whatever you're working on smooth. You add that water and you can run your finger over it and it'll get rid of all those fingerprints, believe it or not, by using your finger and water. So definitely have a little bit of water. I'm just using paint water in the background there, and yeah, I'm just using that to dip my fingers in every so often, every time I want to either smooth it out or have a tool not stick to the box. Now when it comes to painting, I have just used a black undercoat, and that was for the entire thing. You could end up spray painting this. I probably should have spray painted it because I used quite a lot of Warhammer paint in the background there, you can see. And Warhammer paint is not cheap, so this kind of scale model, I would advise you spray paint. But I kind of just went with the flow, and I worked. Pretty much made this in one afternoon, and I decided that I was just going to paint it all in one spot, and I didn't want to go outside and have to set up the spray area or anything like that. So make sure you get an even coat, and I've noticed that wood tends to kind of absorb paint, so you might have to do more than one coat, or at least make sure you don't let it seep in too much. But once it's dried, I didn't actually paint the inside of the box, just because I don't know, I just didn't want to paint the inside of the box. But the outside, you have to make it look like wood again, even though you've pretty much painted it black and got rid of that entire look. So you can really do whatever you want at this point. You could make the box look however you want, whatever color. But I've gone for that typical brown look with a bit of a highlighted, kind of like a highlighted tan brown. And yeah, I'm not really happy with the color, but it works for what it is. And I think I could have done more with it, but maybe next time I could sculpt on some like hinges and stuff like that on the corners to protect the corners, just to make it look a little less boring. But like I said, I'm happy with the end result. I pretty much just dry brushed a bunch of that tanny brown just to give up some highlights and show off the skin folds that I sculpted in. But yeah, there's a lot of things I would have changed with this model, and I would love to go back and make another one, which I will be doing. So you can keep your eyes peeled for that. But this is just a great little project you could do in a day if you have the tools. And it really isn't much, because like I said, it's just a box and epoxy sculpt, so you could do this whenever the hell you wanted. It's really awesome. Like a box, this box itself was made by a friend of mine, and I was pretty much just using it to hold some dice in, and I decided to make it look a little bit more fancier. But you could use literally any kind of box. It doesn't have to be a wooden box. It could be anything, as long as it's not like super flexible, because epoxy sculpt does tend to kind of it gets really stiff. It's got no flex, so don't rely on anything that's flexible. But yeah, like I said, you could do this with anything, as long as you have the creative mindset to get a thing. You don't have to use this exact box, and go wild. Now, one of the biggest regrets I have about this model is I used a Blood for the Blood God paint on the inside of the box. And I thought this would be a really cool idea, and I still stand by that. It is a really cool idea because it looks menacing as heck. So I went with that pink undercoat, and later came back with that Blood for the Blood God. And if you don't know what that paint is, it's basically a paint that it doesn't dry, really. It doesn't look like it ever dries. It's just blood, and it looks bloody the entire time. And one of the things I've noticed with this specific paint is it's actually got a little bit of stickiness to it, so it actually doesn't really dry completely. And if you've got a lid like this that closes, the the two Blood for the Blood Gods paint will actually stick to one another, and I've had multiple counts where I've had to pry this thing apart with quite a bit of force. So I would change that specific paint color that I've used there, but I stand by it. I think it looks cool. I just think it could have been done in a different way. Maybe the inside could have just been left as a wood, or with a different box that didn't rely on the locking mechanism so it didn't slide around. It could have worked a little bit better. So that's the final version of what this looks like. Now, this is some really stiff stuff. I've dropped it, and it's fine, but there is a piece here, right here, it broke. That one piece. I dropped it on concrete from like a standing height, and it didn't, completely break. But if you're using something, like I said earlier, that's softer than wood, it's gonna break rather easily, especially if you're transporting this around, because the teeth can get hooked on things and it can be a little fiddly. So I do definitely want to work on a project where the teeth are kind of on the inside of the box, so you don't see what the actual mimic is until you've opened it. But you can use those techniques that I've just shown on your own kind of little boxes that you want to work on, and it's a really cool project. Like I said, if you want to go crazy, you could make it on the miniature scale and make some little mimics. It'll be a lot more difficult because you're working with a very smaller scale. But like I said, very easy project that anyone could really do as long as you've got a box and some Epoxy Sculpt. Now, this is pretty much one of the first boxes that I've made before. I'm going to be working on a bunch of them. Me and a friend like this box so much that we might sell a couple of them. Who knows where it'll go, but it's just a fun project that I think anyone can do, and I think there's a possible market for it. Who knows? Anyway, I've had a lot of fun with this project, and I hope you guys can enjoy it yourselves. Anyways, as always, stay awesome everyone, and thank you for watching. See you guys.